This is a demonstration on how to cut and score a folding carton. This is derived from a die line, from a 3D file, and it's made out of SBS board. So it's just a white box board. It's very typical for folding cartons. It's got a matte finish on one side and then slightly shiny surface on the other side. So I'm just going to demonstrate how to cut and score and set this up and glue this and some of the features that are incorporated with a folding carton. This particular one has gusseted corners and has a double flap. This would be two-sided printing, so there'll be information on the inside. This was designed to inform the consumer about this nasal inhaler, on how to use it, proper function, and things like that. So I just bought a bunch of these bottles just for position only. But it comes out, and then we have this folding feature on both ends. So in folding cartons, what we need to do is it needs to be die cut, and then it needs to be glued. And after it's glued, it needs to fold flat. This way, it can come from the box board manufacturer and then be shipped to fulfillment. Now, fulfillment would be the people that get these already printed and glued, and then they would set this up and put the product inside and close it and get that ready for shipping out. So there's a couple of phases that goes on with the folding carton. So we need to be cognizant of those different steps of folding flat. Now, some cartons, when they are glued, they don't fold flat. It's very unusual, maybe with fast food and some other things like that, where they might do that. But most situations, we need to have it fold flat after it's glued so it can go to fulfillment. Okay, so that's that carton. So this is the die line. This is what was developed in the 3D file. And I'm going to review all of this in class on how to develop all of these different dimensions and features and how to work that out. So after we create that 3D data file, then we fold everything flat and we can figure out this die line. So this die line, I just printed it and I used a repositionable spray mount. And I sprayed that to a piece of this cardboard. This is, I believe this is 18-point SBS board. We can use several different kinds of boards. We can use some box board and other cardboard substrates that they have at the art store. But the SBS board is the best to use because it's the real material that it would be made out of. So I started cutting this out. So I'm just going to review cutting and scoring. Scoring being creating the folds. We have a special tool that we use. I cut that out already. We have a special tool that we use to create the folds. And the reason we use that tool is to make sure that our folds don't crack any ink, and they're very clean folds with a nice bead inside. So I'll show you how that works. So I'm using an X-Acto blade, X-Acto knife, with a number 11 blade. This is the tool that we all use. So I'm cutting through. Yes, I am. Quite often I'll cut, I'm a little off here. I'm going to fix that. I'll cut my straights and then I'll blend my radiuses right into those straights. I think I have that. So this one I missed here a little. Let me just straighten that out. Okay. So this gusseted corner, I extended a little bit further than I usually do. Quite often this is a full radius in this gusset area. So I'll show you why I did that, because we need that to lock into the sides so the ends can't be pulled open. So we'll talk about that. This is relatively thick, but I'm able to make these cuts in one pass. If you can't, there's nothing wrong with that. Make a couple of passes. Let's just remove this material. I think I cut that already. And so now we just need to do this arc. So I'm cutting arcs. Try to just keep it nice and accurate. Quite often I'll just pivot my arm at my shoulder and I'll rotate the material. I'm getting a nice clean cut. Okay, so that's the outlines. We have some internal cuts here. We have these circles here for the top and bottom of the bottle. Okay. Now down here, this circle is getting very close to this fold. And I did it both ways. You can see here I have the circles very close to this edge. So quite often what happens is this gets a little dog-eared here because the fold is very close to that cut. So quite often what we'll do is we'll cut a little notch in here to keep that away from the fold. It can be a little unsightly, but we'll take a look at that. So there'll be like a little square shape right in there. So I'll show you how that works. So I'm going to make this little cut just past the fold on both sides. And then when I score that, scoring means the folded part, not the cut part. Okay, so now when I do these folds, they should be pretty clean. Okay, so we have one more cut right here. This is this little notch area. So by cutting that over the fold, we create a little bit of a space. I'm just going to move that over just a hair. By cutting that and then making these little ends here, when the fold occurs, it creates the space, which is the cavity, that little space there for this tab to fit in. Okay, so that's all cut out, ready to go. And this is the scoreboard. So this is imitating what a steel rule die cut would look like. I have about 30 thousandths thick piece of brass in here. I trapped it between these two pieces of wood. And that simulates what a die would look like. When this die is made, there will be rules, metal rules all along these edges, and it presses into the board and makes the fold. So what we're going to do is, this is the inside of the box. So I'm going to put the rule on the outside, and I'm going to rub it with this stick, which has this little V cut in it. And it's going to give us this nice little bead, like a little dent in here. So when I fold this cardboard, it'll allow the outside of the material to roll nice and easy and not crack. Like if this was printed with ink, we want to be very careful that when we make these folds, we don't split the ink on the outside. And that's what this tool allows us to do. This is just a white box, so it's not going to be as apparent here, but we'll get really nice professional folds by using this scoreboard. So we have all our cuts now. So now I'm going to score, which is all our folds. So I'm just going to line up these dotted lines, and I'm just going to rub the back of this with this tool on all these folds. So I'm pressing pretty hard. because when the steel rule is put into the tool to do all the die cutting, it's extremely powerful and has a lot of pressure. And it really presses that down very firmly to get these scores. So I'm trying to imitate what that might be by hand. So quite often these boxes are now made on cutting tables. The box board manufacturers, they have these cutting tables, and the designer can lay out the die line and the pattern and then put it to the table and get it all cut out and scored very easily. So for us, we do have a cutting table at the school, but it can take some time. You have to get in the queue, you got to set up your die line, and you have to wait for them to get to that, and they have to set it up. So it actually can be quite a bit quicker just to do it by hand. And I use this process a lot as a design tool, not necessarily as a final outcome. I might do several designs and sketches, and I might lay out some die lines to see how it's going to work. So it's kind of a design process and not so much as a final execution. So with that in mind, I can make several of these boxes by the time I have to wait to get onto the cutting table. So cutting table's fine, but sometimes it can be quicker just to sort of make these by hand. And then we can learn from them and move on, make modifications, make adjustments. And then we can move over to the cutting table, especially when you want to make several of one design. Cutting table can be obviously much more efficient than doing it by hand. But as a design tool, this process works really well, because this will be as good as a prototype, unprinted, of course, but we can use the same process for printed mock-ups also. Okay, so like I had mentioned, I used the repositionable spray mount, so this should come off relatively easily. So by using this double stick, I can remove this whole die line and have a very nice clean box without any, oops, I didn't do my corners. I have to do my gussets. So I'm just going to estimate that 45 right there in the center. Okay. Okay, now we're ready. A little bit too much spray. Kind of hard to estimate a little bit, but that's not too bad. Okay, so here, now we have this nice clean sheet. No lines, no construction lines, and I have these nice beads here. So let's fold one over and I'll show you how that works. So by folding that, we're getting the material to roll on the inside, and then on the outside, we'll have a nice clean edge. So that is a professional fold. No partial cuts. We don't want to cut halfway through the material. You don't want to compromise the material. We want to keep it, but we want it to roll on the inside like this. And then on the outside, just roll around that edge. So if there's any ink on there, it'll all be nice and clean. So that's the reason why we use the scoreboard. Now these gusseted corners, quite often they will do a perf cut, which means it's a fold and little cuts, tiny like little dash cuts to get that to fold even more. That really helps with fulfillment. I'm going to leave that for now because I want that to be nice and clean. So with these scores, we're going to hyper fold all of these, which means I'm going to fold it all the way over and really get that to crease nice and tight. So here we can see our little partial cut here for the tab, how that opens up. Really press those down. Now, sometimes I'm a little off, so I'm just going to make sure, I'm going to move this over a little bit. It's not quite centered. Get that to line up. So here we can see this is folding over, and it's not getting dog-eared because I relieved the material by moving that over. Okay, so now these gusset pieces are going to fold inside. So I'm just going to push them in, get that to fold nice inside. Okay. So what happens is this part is going to come inside and glue. Just going to double check that I'm doing that right. That folds. Probably what would happen is this tab would probably be glued like this, but that's a little unsightly. So I'm going to just tuck it underneath. I will probably lose that battle when we get into production, but I want this mock-up to look nice. So I'm going to put that to the inside. What could happen is this tab could come up all the way to center, but you'd still have that little parting line, and we can get the ink on that surface. But since this is two-sided printing, we can do either way. So I'm going to just glue that to the inside, just for now, since mock-up is nice and clean. So this will be the same thing down here. So when that pops up, it'll sit like this. Okay, so I use Elmer's glue for this also. I know it takes up a moment for it to dry. Not too much, we just need just a little bit. I don't want too much of it to ooze out behind the tab here. So we'll just go like this and make sure this is lined up. And we'll just press that down. So it's very important that this glue area folds flat so we can have that folding carton feature where it folds flat after it glues, and then it can go to fulfillment. So that will go like this when it's set up. And then with the gusset corner, we're going to have this kind of an automatic setup situation, which is quite nice. This, not too much glue. So when we develop these die lines, we're going to consider all of these features, how large things are, how thick they are, clearances for our product inside. But we'll talk about that in a different tutorial. This is just to talk about the handmade process of making a carton. Now these could fold in, they do, okay. This is a parallelogram, all those surfaces line up, so it can fold either way. But the chances are it'll be folded this way because that's how the tabs will be put in and the glue would adhere. But it could go either way. Okay, just gonna make sure that's cleared. Let that dry for a second. So what happens is when this folds up, I have that gusset sticking up just a little bit. So when this is folded in, this can't come out. If that gusset was able to go inside of here, I could probably pull this out and open this up. Now in this situation, it really wasn't that critical, because this box is going to be behind with the pharmacist. And the consumer will have to ask the pharmacist for the product, and then the pharmacist will actually use the box as a tutorial to inform the consumer about how to use the product, because inside will be all the graphics and how to use it and some of the warnings and things like that. So that's why this box looks the way it looks, because it has all this pertinent information on the inside. Okay. Okay, so that looks good. So fulfillment, they would set up the bottom. This sits in, and this top part just passes over the top of that and holds that into position like this. So there would be an insert, a drugs fax insert that would fit up inside on the top here. So it has provisions for that in the top. And then when we fold these in, these corners automatically fold in, and then we have our tab which holds everything together. So now these can't pull out because of that little notch in the tab that locks that in there. So that's how you make a handmade mock-up. So quite often I'll use this technique like I had mentioned. I'll do my sketches and come up with designs. And then since it's a cardboard box, it's very easy to just prototype this. I don't have to necessarily do 3D data files. All I have to do is lay out a die line. And I could do that in a 3D file. I could do it in Illustrator. I could do it by hand, just sort of sketch it out and cut it out and see. And we can learn very quickly by using this process how these things work or how they don't work, and how to modify them and get them to be perfected and get to the point where we really feel strongly about the design. Then we can continue and do our 3D file and do our renderings and create all our art. So this is just a process on designing cartons.